Conformity is not necessarily a trait that needs to be engineered. It is just the nature of persons in positions of power to ensure their safety by redundant means of control. We might suppose that it is to their credit that their means have grown so subtle as to be unbelievable and thus undetectable, but this is not a measure of their competence. This is a trait basic to control itself. A great writer and famous heroin addict once wrote, "Control can never be a means to anything but more control, like junk." Our situation is due more to people who resist control than those that seek to wield it. This film takes as its subject a specific engineered mind control program at work at Temple University's main campus. We were able to discover the mechanism of the program, but not its ultimate purpose. We decided to turn our attention to a different subject, those left unaffected by the mind control radiation, persons somehow ignorant of its influence and possibly still complicit with the project's ultimate aims. The symptoms of this particular form of radiation sickness are fatigue, anxiety, and an inability to hold many pieces of information together in context. These symptoms are most readily identifiable in subjects' speech patterns. In this world where language and thus thought is staggered, a kind of anxiety also arises among subjects, which manifests in a strange kind of gait particular to this environment. It seems obvious that the clock tower would be the source of the radiation. There are no external devices on the surface of the tower, though, that can produce the effects we are observing. Occasionally, devices shaped like loudspeakers produce concentrated blasts of this radiation at passers-by. However, being a state school, Temple was only able to secure not only outdated materials, but ones rejected by the military that developed them. There at the top of the tower, like a caterpillar in a concrete cocoon, is the device. The radiation it produces is relatively weak, but the effects are so general that a kind of harmonizing between affected subjects occurs, and the size of the group itself becomes the most effective part of the program. We did not come to this campus to disrupt this program or to disable its means. Resistance is impossible. We entered this campus despite the overwhelming danger to our own well-being because we sought to find those that could survive this environment intact. Due to a technical issue, we were unable to link the audio and images from this series of interviews. Overall, there were no common physiological factors between subjects. All claimed to be in good health, none of them suffering any physical symptoms from the radioactive environment, but no common elements of drug intake, diet, or pre-existing medical conditions were discovered during the course of the interviews that could explain this immunity. When asked if there was such a thing as a sacred object or place, almost all denied that there was anything innately sacred, but all expressed a respect for the individual's ability to define sacredness. If there was a common psychological factor, it was that most of the people we interviewed did not put themselves in positions of resistance to other people. Political complaint did exist, but there was not really any general wariness towards archetypes of people. Of course, there were those that we thought were appropriate, who refused to be interviewed, who could possibly have been more wary towards certain groups of people, like interviewers. Temple is certainly not the first or last part of Philadelphia to be subjected to Limburgis radiation. The ghettos are subjected to much more sophisticated weapons with more intense and serious effects than at Temple. Northern Liberties is also the site of a Limburgis machine. This one has a much more controlled field with well-defined boundaries. The Free City begins outside of these borders as it unfolds into decrepit and deserted areas. In Northern Liberties, the effects we observed manifest themselves most obviously in the parlor of people's faces, red and yellow hues almost lost on overexposed white faces. There are areas of the city where the radiation has not been applied. In Center City, there are no devices. There is also, oddly enough, no radiation in West Philadelphia, this of course being the center of anything that could be considered serious revolutionary attitudes. The long-term effects of exposure are unknown, as the independent scientific community is only now beginning serious inquiry into the use of this technology on civilian populations. We have been shooting for 9 days, and the effects are visible. I've taken on a red and yellow pallor, and my extremities are beginning to separate at the joints. And there is something written across my forehead I can't quite decipher. In the end, it is hard to tell if we succeeded in our project. We hoped that we could tell who our subjects were by looking at them and hearing how they spoke. Ultimately, I'm not sure we ever found who we were looking for. Those who survive may just be those that accept. Those that thrive are those that adapt to a hostile environment and are ultimately changed by it. We can say to an extent that beauty does exist in these places, and that is a sign of something.